All right, welcome to another edition of the Krueg Show. And today we're talking Niner football with Akash Anavarathan, who joins us from Niners Nation. Akash, how are you?
Fantastic, Larry. How are you doing? Loving the new platform.
I appreciate it. I'm having fun, man, and talking a lot of 49ers, talking a lot of Giants last night after the game. We'll do some Warriors post game. Doing some during the playoff season, but getting a chance to talk a lot about the 49ers and this Jimmy Garoppolo trade, non-trade drama. And, it's kind of bubbled up into a lot of different directions. People saying that the Niner front office has botched it. It's pretty clear that a lot of things have changed since this whole thing started. A lot of quarterbacks are no longer on the board. Give me your thoughts. I mean, why don't we start right there? I mean, are you in the camp that says, you know what, Lynch and Shanahan overplayed their hand, and we don't know what's the future brings for Jimmy Garoppolo. But there's a lot of people that aren't even waiting for that, just going, right into they screwed it up. What do you think?
You get just about every possible angle on the Jimmy Garoppolo trade stuff, from man, the 49ers have screwed it up, to all the way
Right.
to he's a winner, they should just keep him in 2022. But it was clear after Jimmy Garoppolo had his final press conference after the season ended that he thought he was done with the 49ers. It was basically the tone was kind of sad, and he was basically saying his goodbyes to the media. He was thanking everybody. So a lot of us assumed naturally that the 49ers would move on from him this offseason. It made sense. They had Trey Lance in waiting. They could clear $25.5 million in cap space. There were a lot of teams that needed a quarterback. It felt like the writing was on the wall. And I made this analogy earlier today. It felt like the 49ers front office was playing a game of poker. They had a middling hand. They didn't have a great hand, just because of the player Jimmy Garoppolo is, his price tag for this upcoming season, and what the 49ers were looking for in return, which were, as Albert Breer writes, a couple of second-round picks. And so they went into this poker game, and as each move unfolded, right, Aaron Rodgers chose to stay, Russell Wilson went to Denver, the Steelers signed Mitch Trubisky. With each move, it looked like the 49ers' hand was getting slightly worse. And then on Monday, the river card turned up, and it was awful for the 49ers because, Deshaun Watson ended up in Cleveland. Matt Ryan was upset with Atlanta. He ends up in Indianapolis, and all of a sudden, the 49ers are looking around, and there's no logical spot for Jimmy Garoppolo to land. And now they're looking around like, where can we potentially trade him? And I just don't think there's a home to place Garoppolo. And I think they're going to end up holding on to him at least into training camp here, just because there's no logical suitor that will trade for him. And I don't think the 49ers are in a position to just outright release him. I think they look at him as a tradable asset, and I don't think they're just going to cut him to save the $25.5 million, much to the dismay of a lot of fans.
It's really interesting because it's like, do they have an offer for him or not? I mean, I guess my first thing would be like, if you want me to commit to, yeah, I'm with you, they botched this, then I need some concrete data that says they had a good offer on the table. I mean, without that, I don't really feel comfortable saying, yeah, Lynch screwed it up. Yeah,
Right.
Shanahan screwed it up. Now, if we know, I mean, there have been multiple people that have reported they want multiple second-round picks. John Middlecoff said they had a second-round pick potentially on the
Yeah.
table. If we use that as a premise, then, and we don't know what their future is going to hold, I guess you could argue that until they get better than a second-round pick, then they botched it. But that's a dangerous road to go down because we don't know what they were offered. For all we know, they were never offered anything. So that's kind of where I would love to, call this, be aggressive and be like, hey, you know what? The 49ers screwed this up. But I need that other piece of information. I need to know what that offer was that they bypassed before I'm ready to say that.
Absolutely. And Matt Barrows wrote about this a little bit, and he was theorizing a little bit, and I kind of agreed. I think potentially the 49ers had an offer in that range, 2 second-round picks, maybe a second and a third-round pick, maybe something that was conditional. And that's kind of how they reached that assessment of, okay, this is what we think Jimmy Garoppolo is worth. But I think that offer was from a team that Jimmy Garoppolo ultimately said, no, I will not come play for you. And a lot of people, wrote back and they asked, hey, his no trade clause expires at the start of the new league year, right, on March 16th. So the 49ers should be able to send him anywhere. But imagine if you're trading for Jimmy Garoppolo and his camp, right, Don Yee, himself, etc. They say, I'm not going to sign an extension with your team. I don't want to play for your team. Then that team that potentially made the offer to the 49ers moves on to their next plan. And Barrows basically wrote that maybe Washington potentially was that team before they ended up trading for Carson Wentz. As we know, Washington, their general manager is Martin Mayhew. Martin Mayhew spent time in San Francisco for a couple of years. He was with Jimmy Garoppolo. He was with the team when they acquired Garoppolo. So I could see something like that where, maybe Washington made an offer to San Francisco, but Camp Garoppolo said, we're not going to come play for you, Washington Commanders. And then Washington moves on. But the 49ers see, okay, there's a team willing to give us, some mid-round picks. Now let's see if there's another team willing to make the same offer. And ultimately, I don't think there was another team that came close to that offer. And ultimately, they're holding on to him.
The way I see it now is if the 49ers, and there are people that are calling for the Niners to cut, Garoppolo and free up the cap room. I guess I got to know for who, right? Otherwise, if you got a particular free agent that you have targeted and think is going to make this football team significantly better this year, and you want to earmark that money, that Garoppolo cap savings for that player, then I get it. But if the money is going to be used how I think it's going to be used, which is to extend D Ford or extend Nick Bosa,
Hopefully it's not D Ford.
If it's to extend D Ford, that's really something. To extend Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel, then we know when they want to do that. They want to do that right as these players are walking onto the field that in July. So if that's their time frame, they got plenty of time to kind of let this thing play out. That's how I kind of see that. The other one is if they cut him, isn't he for sure going to wind up in Seattle? Isn't that to me is almost like a guarantee. If they cut him, Seattle has Drew Lock right now and Jacob Eason. And Eason's got a big arm. Drew Lock kind of has demonstrated already that he's kind of a wild card, both at Missouri and with Denver, and cannot be really relied upon. If I'm Pete Carroll, if I'm Sean Schneider, if Jimmy Garoppolo comes free, he's better than what we have, and you could probably get him at some kind of a decent price. I think he winds up there if they cut him, and I think they know it. So I don't think they want to cut him. I don't think they want to see him in Seattle. I think they would rather have Seattle commit to a quarterback and release him on their own timeline, potentially if they can't get a trade. Obviously, the preference is a trade. But I think this is driving towards early July and early July game of chicken. And they're either going to get some compensation in early July or they're going to cut him in early July and take their chances where he winds up. What do you think? How do you see it playing out?
100% agree. And obviously his surgery, which threw another wrench in this whole thing, is, one of the other reasons, because he's not going to be able to throw the football until late June, early July, just based on his recovery timeline. And so I think, just like you alluded to, I think the 49ers are going to allow him to get healthy here. When OTAs open in April, May, don't expect him to be there, right? I either expect him to be rehabbing, on his own in Southern California, or maybe he's at the facility, but he's not participating in OTAs. So Trey Lance is going to get all the reps. So the 49ers they won't have to deal with the Garoppolo-Lance dynamic at OTAs. And then once July rolls around, maybe the 49ers are holding out hope that, another starter gets hurt during training camp, like a Teddy Bridgewater did a few seasons ago, something like that, where they, a team immediately Carson Wentz, exactly. A team immediately needs a starting quarterback, and then boom, they can trade him there. But yeah, absolutely, like you said, I think they've earmarked that $25 million towards extensions for those two players, and generally the extensions for these younger players occur, late in the summer before the season begins. So I think the 49ers are going to be patient with this and see what happens. And then the other thing is you'll get an idea post-draft where some of the rookie quarterbacks land, right? Where does Malik Willis go? Where does Kenny Pickett go? And then kind of after that, you can kind of see what the landscape is and see who's still desperate for a quarterback. Would Carolina then be desperate for a quarterback after they've missed out on a rookie? I think that's kind of their time to be able to move Garoppolo. But given the inactivity, I don't think anything happens anytime soon. So I feel like this is going to play on for the next few months.
Let's talk about the teams that even potentially could be in the mix. All right. So Denver obviously went with Russell Wilson. Cleveland went with Deshaun Watson. Indy traded for Matt Ryan. Commanders, not natural for me to say that. Commanders traded for Carson Wentz.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Saints signed Jameis Winston back. Steelers went with Trubisky. I thought there was a very good chance that the Steelers would have been a team interested in Jimmy, but they went Trubisky. Atlanta replaced Matt Ryan with Marcus Mariota. Houston has Davis Mills still there. And Lovie Smith is saying, hey, we love Davis Mills. Carolina has Sam Darnold at $18.5 million for this year under contract. Seattle's got Drew Lock and Jacob Eason, as we said. Niners right now with Trey Lance and Nate Sudfeld. So let's talk about those three teams at the end. The Texans, the Panthers, and the Seahawks. I can't see the 49ers. Though if I'm the Seahawks, I would want Jimmy over Drew Lock and Jacob Eason. And if I'm the 49ers, I wouldn't fear having Jimmy in the division. Yep. The question is, can John Schneider and John Lynch actually get on the same page on a trade, or are these guys too much rivals at this point to actually be able to figure out what the correct compensation would be and get Jimmy in Seattle? Do you see any way the Niners and Seahawks cook up a trade here?
I think the 49ers would certainly be in favor of it. If the Seahawks were to make an offer that met the 49ers' demands, I think they would certainly consider trading Jimmy Garoppolo within the division. I don't think they necessarily fear having to play him a couple times a year, though it would be a bad look if they continued to lose against the Seahawks even after trading them Jimmy Garoppolo. Just interesting to see if the Seahawks want Garoppolo, right? They obviously, like you mentioned, they have Drew Lock as a starter. I think they like the idea of being able to kind of rehabilitate his career. They think he has some like untapped potential that in Denver, because of the coaching staff changes, the offensive coordinator changes, that Lock struggled because of that. And the other thing they like is Drew Lock's big arm, right? They've got Tyler Lockett going down the field. They got DK Metcalf in his big catch radius. And they think that Drew Lock can potentially take advantage of that. I don't know if that's the case, but I think that's at least what they're saying publicly. And so does Jimmy Garoppolo fit that, receiver skill set? I'm not sure. So I think that's more of the question is, would Seattle actually trade for Jimmy Garoppolo and pay him the $25.5 million that he would be owed next season? And give trade compensation over to a rival. That's the part that I don't see coming into fruition. Now, if he was released, like you mentioned, I think Seattle would be a prime destination because it's one of the few spots left where he would be named the starter immediately, I think, because there's not many starting spots available around the NFL right now. So I think he would be interested in that sense, but I'm not sure if the Seahawks would, look for a trade necessarily.
Gosh, what do you think of the Texans as a fit? They do have Davis Mills. They're obviously not a very good football team, but teams don't necessarily think of themselves that way. I mean, yeah, they're not a great football team, but they may, they do have Nick Caserio there, and he could have a belief that Jimmy is better than Davis Mills, or that he'd like to have Jimmy there with Davis Mills. Davis Mills on a rookie contract. Theoretically, he could have them both. What do you see the Texans as a viable landing spot for Garoppolo?
I think the Texans I think they really should see just what they have in Davis Mills. I thought Davis Mills actually had a pretty good rookie season for where he was drafted. I think he was, coming out of Stanford, he was probably more of a first round talent, but he had the injuries. He didn't have as much playing time. And so that caused him to slide back to the third round. And so I just think they should see what they have in Davis Mills. Their team isn't very good. They're not going to compete, especially in that division, right? Colts now with Matt Ryan, Titans who have perennially won that division under Mike Vrabel now. So I don't think they're going to compete. So I don't think it makes sense for them to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo at his price tag, especially because I don't think they're going to win very many football games. And if you're Garoppolo, why would you want to, go to Houston and, try to be the starter there, potentially on a contract year, not knowing if they'll re-sign you after that? I think from that standpoint, the only reason it makes sense and the only reason I feel like it's brought up is because of the Nick Caserio, Jimmy Garoppolo connection. But from a timeline standpoint, I don't think it makes sense. And I think that's what's happened with a lot of these suitors is some of these teams that are looking for a bridge quarterback, they've just chosen to go the cheaper free agent route because they cost less and you don't have to give up draft picks, right? That's what Pittsburgh did. That's what Atlanta's done. And unfortunately, that just means the 49ers haven't been able to move Garoppolo to some of those teams.
Yeah. At the bottom of the screen there, people see the Good Guys Hot Rod Custom Association, little advertisement for their show. They're our sponsor today, so let's give them some love. Good Guys 38th All-American Get-Together is this weekend in Pleasanton at the Pleasanton Fairgrounds there in Alameda County. The All-American Get-Together March 26th and 27th at the Alameda County Fairgrounds, I should say, in Pleasanton. It's America's favorite car show. There'll be over 3,000 American-made and powered hot rods, muscle cars, and trucks out there on display. It's an awesome weekend of entertainment. If you're looking for something to do with the family, they'll have the Nitro Thunderfest, the Lowrider Exhibition, which is indoors. And then they're going to have they'll award their Good Guys Fuel Curve Custom of the Year. And it's just a really good time. So if you've ever been to the Good Guys show, check them out in Pleasanton. Should be phenomenal weather there this weekend. And if you want more information or just register your vehicle or get tickets or more details about the upcoming show this weekend in Pleasanton, hit the website right there, good-guys.com. That's good with the dash in the middle. Guys.com. Thanks to Andrew Ebel and all the good people at Good Guys. Check out the Good Guys 38th All-American Get-Together. I don't know if you've ever been to the Good Guys show, Akash, but man, very fun stuff in Pleasanton. If you're a car guy, what was your first car, Akash? What was the first thing you were driving around?
First car my parents got me, a Volkswagen Jetta, actually.
Volkswagen Jetta. Nice. Yeah. I had the Chevy Nova. The 1970 Chevy Nova with bench seating. Seating.
Damn, throwback.
It could haul a number of people in high school. All right, let's get to the Carolina Panthers. Now, I thought it was kind of interesting today that the Carolina Panthers restructured Christian McCaffrey's contract to create, sounds like maybe between $4 and $5 million of extra cap room. That in and of itself wouldn't necessarily catch my eye. Lots of teams do that with their players that they like and want to keep. But the fact of the matter is that pushes them from having not enough room for Jimmy Garoppolo to having enough room for Jimmy Garoppolo, and kind of got my attention. Is there anything there, do you think, with the Carolina Panthers? And the reason I bring up the Panthers is because they've been trying to get a quarterback this whole offseason. They wanted Deshaun Watson. They've been trying for a number of guys and losing out. And Matt Rule, I got to think, might be a little bit on the hot seat here. And he's got Sam Darnold under contract at $18.5 million. And I don't know how good Jimmy is, but I know he's probably considered better than Darnold. So are the Panthers a landing spot for Garoppolo? What do you make of that whole thing with McCaffrey today?
I thought that was interesting too. I thought that was super interesting because they already had about $24 million in cap space before the restructure. And Christian McCaffrey's deal isn't very team friendly. I think he's under contract till 2026. And the last 3 or 4 years of that deal I was looking are like 17, 18, $19 million for an aging running back that was injured, the last few seasons. So that contract doesn't look particularly great. And when you restructure a player, it gets that much more difficult to move him. So when they cleared about $5 million of cap space, and now they're at about $29 million, I thought that was interesting because I don't think there's free agents available that they would necessarily go after that they need the extra $5 million of cap space for. And
right.
I thought, they made that move, and then that Garoppolo's salary is about $25.5 million. So you start connecting the dots a little bit. And then you're like, man, that, would they trade for Jimmy Garoppolo with Sam Darnold on the roster? But the problem with Carolina is they don't have a second or a third round pick this season. I think they have a first round pick and then they have a fourth round pick. So what happens with like the trade compensation there? And when I posted that on Twitter, a lot of people were just like, send Jimmy to Carolina. We'll take anything in return. We'll take the fourth. We'll take the sixth. We'll take any pick they have. It doesn't matter. Just get rid of him. But I do think you're right. I do think Matt Rule, David Tepper, new owner, new GM Scott Fitterer, they're extremely desperate to win in Carolina. I think Matt Rule's on the hot seat. But the other problem is they've been to all these pro days. If you've been watching, they were at Malik Willis's pro day, both the coach and the GM. Kenny Pickett's pro day. So I think they could really go the rookie quarterback route and then just hold on to Sam Darnold at his $18 million price tag. But say they aren't able to draft a rookie quarterback, I think they could be a sneaky Garoppolo destination later after the draft. Just because I think they're desperate to win, and I'm not sure they can do that with Darnold. The deal for Darnold and then picking up his fifth-year option and paying him $19 million this season looks not so good. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting timing on the clearing of the cap space, just because it's kind of, the first wave of free agency is kind of over. So not sure what their intent was, but it neatly fits our narrative that Jimmy Garoppolo could end up in Carolina.
Itchy95 says, I've heard people propose a trade with Carolina, Jimmy for Darnold in a second in next year's draft. The 49ers don't necessarily, they already have 9 draft picks. They don't have a first. They don't necessarily need a pick in this year's draft if they wanted to get true round value, right? Let's say they wanted to get Jimmy. I guess the question is, the one thing we know Carolina can't do is they can't trade for Jimmy and keep Darnold.
Right.
Then they're going to have a ridiculous amount of money and pretty average quarterbacks. So that's a move that gets somebody's getting fired for that. If you got Jimmy and Darnold. So I got to think Darnold has got to be in the mix if they were to get Jimmy. How do you think how Shanahan feels about Sam Darnold? And then we got this one as well here. Mondo Ramirez says, how about a 3-way trade? Jimmy to Carolina, Darnold to Seattle. With the USC connection, Pete's there, Darnold's a USC guy, and then Picks coming to the Niners. Does that work?
I like the 3-way trade that Mondo's proposed over the 2-way trade. I want no part of Sam Darnold on the 49ers, partially because, they've got their backup quarterback in Nate Sudfeld. They've guaranteed, I think, $2 million in his contract. That guarantee basically tells you how they feel about him and wanting to keep him because I heard he had quite a bit of people that were looking to sign him as a backup quarterback. So I think they view him in that light. And then the thing with Sam Darnold is he's on his 5th-year option. So it's like a guaranteed $19 million. You can't restructure that. You can't lower that number. It's guaranteed. If the Panthers were to cut him, they'd eat $19 million in dead money. The only way you can get rid of it is by trading the player. So I don't think the 49ers should pick that up, because if you were to take Darnold back and you were to trade Jimmy, you'd only be netting $6 million in cap space, which just doesn't make sense. You might as well just rather hold on to Jimmy in that case. So I do like the 3-way trade, though. I can see that happening where Seattle says, okay, we've got a ton of cap space. Let's see what we got with Sam Darnold and Drew Lock. I don't think we're going to be very good this year. And then Carolina says, okay, we'll upgrade at quarterback. We've got the cap space. And then Picks come back to San Francisco. So I like that idea, actually.
Carolina's in an interesting spot too, because, who cares, what, if you make a good deal or not, if you're not the coach anymore, right? So, in some ways we've seen teams make bad deals. What do you think of Carolina trying to get Jimmy, moving Darnold's contract, even if it were to a team like the 49ers? If the Niners got Darnold's contract, and let's say, well, why would the Niners do that? The only way they would do that is if Carolina threw in a significant pick or two to incentivize them to do that. But my question to you, I guess, is more of a cap-related question. If the Niners got Darnold's contract, let's just say they liked him as a number 2 and thought, his value's low, and in Kyle's system, we think that we can build up his value. Could they then take his $18.5 million owed this year, stretch him out on a 3-year deal, and then between Sudfeld and Darnold, you've got your backup still, commanding combined about, maybe $8 million on the cap. That's not totally crazy if you liked Darnold, thought you could turn him around and trade him in 2 years or a year from now for far more than what you're obviously getting him, at a higher price.
That would be the play there with Sam Darnold. If you think you can rehabilitate his career and potentially extend him, lower the cap hit. But the problem is if you assume Trey Lance is a starter and Trey Lance is playing well, that means Sam Darnold's probably not playing. So, the last tape that teams would have had on him is his Carolina tape and, preseason reps or whatever. And so would teams really trade anything of value at that point? I'm not sure. It sounds like the 49ers would be trying to do a lot in that situation, right? It seems like they would be compounding their problem instead of just trying to move Jimmy Garoppolo for a pick. Now they're trying to move for a different player so they can, recoup that value in the future. And it sounds like something the 49ers would do because they run everything like an economic exercise and they hold value, on these trade assets like very, very, very high. But I really don't believe in Sam Darnold as a player, especially after what I saw this season. I thought maybe the Jets and that situation was the reason, but it was not very good in Carolina, and I just don't know if he can be molded into a capable quarterback in the NFL.
Is there any way that you could see Jimmy Garoppolo back with the 49ers this year? Is there any scenario that he's back on the roster from your vantage point? Or is that just a non-starter, no chance, no how?
I feel like some 49ers fans should probably, close their ears, but I think there is a chance.
Really?
I think there's a chance because the guy that runs the operation, the guy that makes every decision on every player in that organization, Kyle Shanahan, believes in Jimmy Garoppolo to the point where he ended up playing him, in week 18 in Los Angeles and through the playoffs with a torn ligament in his thumb and a torn capsule in his shoulder over Trey Lance, who he, traded up to go get. So I think Kyle Shanahan feels comfortable going right back to Jimmy Garoppolo because he knows what he has in the player. He feels comfortable there. And if they're unable to move Garoppolo in a trade for what they feel is fair compensation, I think they would feel comfortable running it back. Now, do they run it back at, his cap hit of $27 million? I don't think so. I think he would come back on a pay cut or a restructure or a lower cap number that allows them to extend Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa. But I think there's a scenario there. And I don't think the 49ers are panicking based off of the lack of suitors or anything like that. They'll just move right on to plan B and potentially play Garoppolo this upcoming season if it gets to that.
It's interesting. It's like Trey likes Jimmy, Jimmy likes Trey, and I really believe that. I really believe that's not contrived or
Nope.
Look for the cameras. I think there's actual genuine affinity for each other there. So that would work. But then I just think any locker room that has Jimmy Garoppolo, he's going to practice better probably than Trey. He's been in the offense longer. He's been in the league longer. And if you really want to commit to Trey Lance, I don't know how you do that with Jimmy sitting right there and he's taking you to a couple NFC championship games and one Super Bowl. To me, that's inviting the circus to town. And I don't think that they feel like that's a scenario, even though I think if you ask them, they would rather have Jimmy coming off the bench than Nate Sudfeld, but they can't deal with another year of a split locker room and the players pulling for Jimmy and them feeling like they have to go with Jimmy. What they have to do is put Trey Lance on the field and find out what he's about, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the only way this goes forward for the 49ers?
And I think that's what OTAs is going to provide for the 49ers, right? Trey Lance is going to get all the reps. Jimmy Garoppolo isn't going to be there. They're going to be able to see, is his offseason work, is all the work he put in last season, has that development truly come to fruition? And if it has and they feel confident, then I'm sure they would, move forward with that plan. But in the event he, struggles or has a slow start or an injury like last year, right? He had the finger injury, then the knee injury. If there's any type of situation, then I'm sure they feel comfortable going right back to the old reliable Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's why I'm just saying, I think with the way it's played out and, not being able to move him in a trade, they feel comfortable just letting this thing play out. Let's see what happens in OTAs. Let's see what happens in some of the other quarterback situations around the league, and then let the chips fall where they may. I don't think they're hastily trying to make a decision now just to save the cap dollars.
All right, let's finish. I'll ask you very direct questions. Just give me a one team answer here. Week 1, Jimmy Garoppolo, your prediction is with?
Let's say Carolina Panthers.
San Jose SaberCats. Carolina Panthers.
The XFL.
The Demons. The XFL SF Demons. All right, let's hit a couple more things before we say goodbye. What'd you think? K1 Williams went to Denver. I know a lot of Niner fans are like, good riddance. This guy, if you ask D'Amico Ryans, he'd tell you, man, the guys down there believe in this guy. Now, I know he lost a step in coverage, and that's real. And as you age, you don't gain that step back. You'll lose another step. So I have no problem with them moving on from him. But let's acknowledge the importance of this player to their defense. I mean, he's a diminutive player, but man, he had huge, huge heart against the run. I think he was better against the run than against the pass. He did get roasted a little bit this last year in coverage, and he got more money than I thought he would get. But I don't see a replacement for him on the roster, so that makes me nervous because the nickel corner, which 5-10 years ago was like just a guy. Now your nickel corner is one of the 3 or 4 most important guys in your football team, one of the key guys in your defense in a sub-package heavy NFL. What's your read on K1's departure?
I thought it was good for K1 Williams because he ended up actually getting a pay raise. I think he was making around $2 million this season, and now he has a 2-year contract with the Denver Broncos making up to $7 million. And just like you mentioned, I think he's a fantastic run defender. And the 49ers end up playing nickel defense a lot just because in the NFL, they run more 3 wide receiver sets. And, you have 2 linebackers and 3 corners usually. And K1 Williams is fantastic as a run defender. And he's able to support in run defense in the 49ers scheme. And then the other thing is he's a fantastic slot blitzer. D'Amico Ryans and Robert Saleh over the last couple of years, they used him in that spot a lot. That's where he gets his nickname from, right? Shark, because they call it the Shark Blitz, coming off the slot. And those 2 things he was really good at. But you were right. He lost a step in terms of his athleticism. And I thought that limited the 49ers' ability to play different coverages on the back end. Just because now if the 49ers want to play man, now you have K1 Williams matched up against someone in the slot that's a little bit quicker, a little bit faster. And when you have guys like Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, just some of these better slot receivers in the NFL, it was just a tough matchup for K1 Williams. And I think the 49ers are trying to get younger there. So moving forward, like the comment mentions there, I think this is what the 49ers are going to do. I think they're going to start Charvarius Ward and Emmanuel Mosley as their outside corners. And in nickel situations, they'll slide Emmanuel Mosley inside, and they'll have Ambry Thomas play on the outside. I think the 49ers did this in 2011 when they had Carlos Rogers and those guys under Jim Harbaugh. And I think they'll do something similar here, assuming they don't sign, a veteran slot corner, which just gauging the market, I don't think there's someone that's better than what they currently have on the roster.
Couple last things. What do you think of the free agent haul so far, as the guys, before we get into the guys they got rid of? What do you think of the guys that they have signed? Is there anybody that you look at that on that list and say, yeah, you know what, I'm fired up, that guy's on this team?
I think the first signing, Charvarius Ward, was really good. I think the 49ers knew going into this offseason, outside corner was a big area of need. I mean, they rolled out Josh Norman for half the season, and he was getting just burnt down the sideline more often than not, or giving up pass interference penalties. And they just had to fix that spot ever since Jason Verrett went down. And Charvarius Ward, I thought, was, he's not in your elite cornerback tier. He's not on the J.C. Jackson or the Stephon Gilmore tier, but he's a really solid corner, and he's really on like a two-year, $27-ish million deal. And then the third year kind of the salary is unguaranteed. So depending on how he performs, they can always have him back. So I thought it was a really team-friendly deal that they have him on. He performed really well with the Chiefs. He was constantly asked to guard the opposing team's number 1 receiver, and he often just rose to the challenge. I think he only gave up like 400 yards in coverage. Really, it came in one game against Jamar Chase, and Jamar Chase is beating everybody. So yeah, I thought that was a really good move. I think it just solidifies one spot. He's been a healthy player, just a high character guy, and now you have your outside corner spots figured out, and I thought that was an improvement. And then the other 2 guys, Oren Burks and George Odom, when they first signed, you're like, who are these guys? And then you dig a little bit deeper, and Oren Burks, one of the leaders in the NFL in special teams tackles. And then George Odom was an all-pro special teams player a couple years ago. And I texted with the Colts team reporter, and she spoke extremely highly of Odom and just what he brought to the locker room, his toughness, his ability to tackle. So I think 2 areas where they struggled last season, special teams and pass defense, especially with their quarterbacks, they've improved upon. I think they still have some other holes to fill along their roster, but they made their one splash play with Ward, and they've kind of filled out the roster in some other spots. So I think it's been a good free agent period so far for the 49ers. It's been just overshadowed by all the Garoppolo trade stuff.
Yeah. Special teams, it's like, people, you care about special teams on game day, but if all you care about is special teams on game day, that's just pure lip service. If you're really committed to being good on special
Right.
teams, you care about special teams in March and April and May as you're putting the football team together. And I think they kind of showed that, they're going to prioritize trying to improve on special teams. How about the group of guys that they lost? First of all, is Arden Key in Detroit? Is that a done deal, or is Arden Key still there?
Arden Key is, I think he's taking visits. He was in Detroit. I think he was in Jacksonville today. And my guess is the 49ers probably made him an offer. And now Arden Key is going around visiting other teams, shopping around, trying to see if he can get something else before he ultimately decides. So he's still a free agent. But I think the two key losses, obviously, Laken Tomlinson and DJ Jones. Laken Tomlinson, I think his biggest strength was his availability. I think he missed like 2 snaps in his time with the 49ers, and those 2 snaps were to like tie his shoes or something like that. He was a really solid player, but I think the 49ers weren't going to overpay. Kyle Shanahan values centers and tackles. When they came here, they traded a 5th round pick for Laken Tomlinson. They've had an AAF player in Dan Brunskill at right guard. So that's a position they just don't overpay. And I didn't think they would go to that extent for Tomlinson. And he had a bunch of suitors, right? The Jets, Dolphins, Bengals, just teams that needed O-line help, had cap space. So good for Laken Tomlinson. He deserves that contract. And then DJ Jones, probably one of my favorite players on the team, just because of his size and his athleticism. It just does not make any sense how a player this big moves that quickly with that type of force. It's one of the best run defenders in the game. But again, 49ers have Javon Kinlaw. They invested a 1st round pick in him. And DJ Jones really stepped up when Kinlaw missed time this season. But with Javon Kinlaw expected to return, I think it just made sense to let DJ Jones walk, collect the comp pick, and again, another player that's in Denver now. So I think those guys got good contracts, good deals, good for them. They've earned their payday, but I think the 49ers kind of made the right decision on both.
Are there replacements on the roster? I mean, you mentioned Kinlaw. I guess the question with Kinlaw is the knee. And then, as far as Tomlinson, is Aaron Banks, the starter at left guard? Like, he was a left guard at Notre Dame. Do you just think, though, that's just like the automatic replacement? Or do you think that those guys' departures now open up a hole and they don't have a lot of belief in those guys or can't trust those guys and will try to replace Tomlinson and DJ in the draft?
I think the 49ers believe that they have their replacements in-house, right? Aaron Banks at left guard and Javon Kinlaw in the DJ Jones role on this defensive line. I think they'll still add competition. I think for Aaron Banks, it'll be Jalen Moore, right? They drafted him a couple seasons ago. I think in college he was a tackle at Western Michigan, but I think they view him as a guard. So I think there's some competition there potentially. And the defensive line, they signed Hassan Ridgeway, who I texted a few people. They thought he was better in Jim Schwartz's scheme a couple seasons ago, where he was just a pure interior pass rusher, than he was last season in Gannon's defensive scheme, where he was asked to do a little bit too much. So I think the combination of Ridgeway, they get Maurice Hurst back this season, who was hurt, missed a lot of time last season, then Kinlaw. Now you have a little bit of interior depth there. And then, like I mentioned, you have some competition at left guard. So that's why I thought they didn't make a big play in free agency to go sign a nose tackle or go sign a guard. They may still add some, someone on a flyer deal, but I think they believe they have replacements in-house and why they felt comfortable letting those guys walk.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ridgeway may give him a little bit as a pass rusher. How about of the players that that are still unsigned, Tart, Verrett, Jordan Willis. We already mentioned Arden Key, but Marcel Harris, Jeff Wilson. Who's the priority there? I mean, who would you prioritize? Who do you think they will?
I would prioritize the edge rushers, Jordan Willis and Arden Key. I guess Arden Key is more of an interior rusher. But I would prioritize those guys. I thought, especially towards the end of the season, the 49ers edge rotation, I mean, when Chris Kocurek gets with these guys, it just gets better and better. Jordan Willis, Charles Omenihu, Arden Key. I mean, they were dominating towards the end of the season, where they just had fresh legs. They were constantly being rotated in, and these guys are just inexpensive and playing across from one of the best in the league, and Nick Bosa. And so I would prioritize bringing back those guys. I don't think Kwaski Tart is returning, unfortunately. I think highly of him as a player. He's just a fundamentally sound safety. But I do think the 49ers have kind of turned the page. I think they're going to start to turn that position over to either Talanoa Hufanga or Tarvarius Moore, who returns from the torn Achilles. And then obviously Georgia Odom, who will probably compete at that safety spot. So I think Kwaski Tart's probably walking. Some of the other names that you mentioned, maybe a Marcel Harris probably doesn't return. I think they feel comfortable with the linebackers they have in the room. They could use some depth at receiver or at running back, So maybe there's a Jeff Wilson reunion in there. The running back market has really moved slowly, so they're probably just waiting that out. But I would prioritize the defensive lineman that you mentioned.
Itchy 95. We'll finish with the last couple minutes here, just with Akash, with some of the questions that are in the chat. Itchy 95 says, I'd like to see BPA this whole draft. He's talking about best player available. I kind of agree with that. And I personally, I think that's the only way to draft. I mean, the Ravens do it year after year after year after year. Don't go into it, we need to get. That's how you pick the wrong freaking guy. Go into it with who fell to us that we really like, that, we think's a really damn good football player. If you're constantly drafting, good value football players, I think that's the better move than, chasing the free safety. I got to have a defensive end. There's a lot of street free agents, and I wouldn't chase position. I mean, some years you have to, but to me, if you're at that spot, that was because of previous mistakes that your general manager made. I like the best player available approach. I think they ought to go that route. And I like getting more bodies. If you look at the Niners, the greatest run they've ever had as a team was when? Well, it was definitely in the late 80s, early 90s, right? And why did they do that? How did they have that run? What fueled that run? It was Jerry Rice in 85, but it was that 86 draft where they traded back and back and back and back, and they wound up with a core of guys that were incredible. They were great in 87. They won it all in 88. They won it all in 89. They were probably a Roger Craig fumble away from going 3 in a row, and they were still good in those years in the early 90s when the Cowboys rose up with a lot of those same core players. Don Griffin, Tim McKyer, Kevin Fagan, Charles Haley, Tom Rathman. So to me, if they could, I like the idea of trading back and trying to put together a 12 to 15 person draft class with drafted and undrafted guys and set yourself up for the emergence of Trey Lance and a very healthy cap into the Lance era. That's how I'd play the draft. How do you see it?
100% agree. And I haven't really dug into the draft yet, just because I usually let free agency play out and then really spend the next month looking into that stuff. But, just reading Daniel Jeremiah and Mel Kiper and these big draft guys, it looks like this draft isn't as good at the top. It isn't top heavy, but there's a ton of depth in the middle rounds. And the 49ers have 9 picks in this draft. They got a bunch of comp picks back for some of the hires, right? Some of the diversity hires between, Mike McDaniel and Martin Mayhew and Robert Saleh these last few seasons. So now they're just loaded in those middle rounds where generally they've done well, right? In late in day 2, early day 3, that's where really they've been able to hit on some of these picks. So I like that approach too. I think you never want to go into the draft saying, I need to address that position, because you end up usually reaching for a player that's not quote unquote has value. So I like the best player approach always, because you just never know where you'll need depth, where injuries will occur, all those types of things. So I like that approach, especially when you have as many picks as the 49ers do this season.
Last one, and we appreciate you spending time with us, Akash, and really been great having you on. If they did say, you know what, we're not going best player available, we're going to go fill our number one need, what is it, in your opinion? What is the number one need on paper right now? Is it a pass rusher? Is it a receiver? Is it there are a lot of Niner fans yelling, corner, get a corner, but it might be free. I mean, key guys, and they're pretty good on the corner now with the bodies, but I mean, do they have a free safety who can play a deep coverage middle? Do they have a nickel corner who, can handle that two-way break. That's a very hard position to play for a lot of rookies. Is it guard on the offensive line? Is it some people would argue that when you look at Kinlaw, that he's strictly a rundown guy, and that you lost DJ, who's an interior rusher. You lost Street, who's got a lot of speed inside. Maybe it's an interior rusher. They seem like they always prioritize D tackle, D end. What's the priority, if there is one, going into the draft?
I'd say there's three. I'd say let's start edge rusher, right? We talked about a couple of the names that were free agents, but you're just looking for a guy that you can pair with Nick Bosa. If you have a pass rushing tandem, it just takes pressure off the rest of your defense. And the 49ers have Nick Bosa, and they try to, pair D Ford, but his health and availability has always kind of limited that. So I would say this draft class, especially being deep at the defensive line position, I would say that's something that they can address, in day 2 with their second round pick potentially. Starting safety, I know they believe in Talanoa Hufanga, who they used a day 3 pick on last season. He made the biggest play of the season, arguably, with the return in Green Bay to score the touchdown. But I think they could definitely use a true starting safety there next to Jimmy Ward, who I think they really believe in. So I would say those two positions on defense probably the biggest need. And then on offense, I'd say interior offensive line. Constantly, it's been a rotating door at right guard. And so either right guard or center. I think with Alex Mack, it was a question if he was coming back or not. And the 49ers really value having an experienced center. So I can see them drafting one of the centers, whether that's Cam Jurgens, I think out of Nebraska, or the Iowa kid, Tyler
Linderbaum. Yeah, he's good.
So one of those guys potentially. So I would say those three probably are their biggest needs after the kind of this first wave of free agency.
Hey, man, it was good rapping with you. If I go to Niners Nation right now, and I go there probably 3-4 times a day, and I have it bookmarked. I just kind of constantly looking at the front page, see if anything breaks. But if I go to Niners Nation right now and I'm looking under your name, what's up right now that you have that people can go check out, and then tease what you're working on? What's the next thing that's coming down the pike from you on Niners Nation?
Of course, we've got a fantastic team that does great work. I broke down some of the free agent signings, just how they fit within the 49ers defense, primarily Charvarius Ward. And then looking ahead, if they don't continue to make any moves here in free agency, we'll probably turn the page to the draft, and we'll start to look at some prospects they could potentially draft on day 2. It was a lot more interesting last year when they had the 3rd overall pick and talking quarterbacks. And now I think they don't pick till 61, so less interesting. But I think we'll turn the page to the draft here in the next week or so.
Well, it should be fun, man. I always love chopping up all the draft stuff and getting deep into it. Hey, man, really appreciate the time. Hopefully, we'll get a chance as maybe around the draft time in a month or so to get you back on and kind of pick your brain and see what you thought of Lynch's draft haul. But thanks for coming on.
Of course, appreciate you having me.